Nintendo Enthusiast was one of the biggest Nintendo websites on the internet. Each month it brought in between 300,000 and a million page views, while its social media pages had tens of thousands of followers. Enthusiast Gaming, its parent company, was at one point worth over $1 billion. Now it's worth just a measly 400 million, but you get the point. It's just this giant corporation, and it employed a lot of writers. But many of these writers were making about $2 per article. Just is such a small amount, and at the end of the day, when it realized the sites weren't profitable enough, it shut it down. After a decade of promises to its freelance writers, it laid everyone off, fired them, shut down the sites, including many it had acquired, and sent them home. It promised so many things: full-time employment, it promised stock options, it promised a life doing what you love, and at the end of the day, we got nothing. Some writers got offers to go to other places. They would come with better pay. But because they'd been with this company for so many years and had been promised, a full-time job, they didn't take these offers because they had been loyal. And at the end of the day, the company did not return that loyalty back to them. To provide some context, I started at Nintendo Enthusiast, the first site under the Enthusiast Gaming company, almost a decade ago. It was in 2013. I was 16 years old. And as a writer in that time, I wrote more than 2,000 articles for the website. I knew Menashe, the founder and now ex-president of the company, very well. For years, we literally chatted every day on Skype. And as time went on and the company grew, we obviously spoke less. He had this job. He was running a giant company. But still, we kept in contact. I would come visit in Toronto for the conventions, and we spoke then. And also, even just a few years ago, he wrote me a letter of recommendation. So I know the company and him relatively well. I hope that from this video you take away this. My first choice profession was as a video game journalist, or at another place in the industry with my skills. Yet, I came to law school, Yale Law School in fact, instead, because I thought there was a more likely chance I'd get into an elite law school than find a job in the game industry for a living wage. That should tell you something. So I'm going to give you the entire story of my time at Enthusiast Gaming, the things I saw, the way that people were treated, the promises that were made, and kind of the key takeaways to take from this entire experience. I hope that at the end of the day, you understand that companies do not have your best interest in mind. They'll promise you everything. But at the end of the day, they're still out to make a profit, and if it comes at your expense, that's the way it'll happen. So I began writing in Enthusiast Gaming in 2013, as I noted. It was, for me, a dream job. I was making $3 per 1,000 page views. That was the way it initially set up. And at the time, it was enough for me as a teenager. A lot of teenagers will work in their off time. Obviously, they don't have to pay for rent, health insurance, and they'll work jobs at a cash register or, wherever else in order to get some money to spend on, to go out or to go to the movies. For me, that was also the case. I worked as a janitor at a church. And I started playing, doing this job. I always wanted to be a games journalist, and that's where I was spending my time. And I was actually making enough to where I could quit my job as a janitor. With the amount I was making, I was able to pay for my car insurance as a teenager, and to buy video games I liked, and to go out with friends. It was enough for that. But, how much do you really need to do that as a teenager? Maybe $1,000 a year of me writing a lot. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how much I was making at the time, but I do remember the rate. It was $3 per 1,000 page views. And in that first year, I really felt like I had made it. When I was 17 years old, which is the minimum age they allow you in, I went as a journalist to cover E3. Around me, there were these games journalists, that worked for the New York Times, for CNN, and of course at big websites like Kotaku. And I really felt like I had made it. Here I was, this 17-year-old, sitting in this room writing about games, interviewing some of the biggest names in games, playing these games a year before they came out, writing about them, making videos about them. I'm like, this is what I want to do forever. This is the best job. Now, of course, the site was really small. They couldn't pay for me to go. They would pay me for, once again, the $3 per 1,000 page views, and I actually made enough to pay for my trip. I didn't make money on net. I went and did all this work for a week, but I had a terrific time with my friends. I did a shitload of writing, and at the end of the day, my writing paid for my trip. I felt okay about it. After we got back, as the site grew, they changed the structure for getting paid. So instead of getting paid by the page view, you got paid a set rate. It was $1 per 100 words. If you're writing a news article, usually at that time we were writing news articles between 150 and 200 words, so you're getting paid about $2 per news article. And then that would go up to $10 for 1,000 words if you wrote a feature or review or whatever. So it'd be $10. there was no extra rate for reviews. So if you spent 40 hours writing a review and you wrote 1,000 words at the end of the day, it was still $10 that you would get, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. On the other hand, a lot of people don't realize, but gaming reviews get like the least amount of traffic. I mean, some news will get less traffic, but really game reviews are nothing compared to feature articles and opinion pieces and even previews. Is kind of shocking. You know, if our feature articles would get, I don't know, like 5,000 views, the new, you know, a review that came out for a big game would maybe get like 1,200. It was actually, it was completely shocking. I always thought that reviews would get more because I was always interested in them. But, so the pay didn't scale, depending on how much time you spent. It was based off the words, which is fine for freelancing, but it was just incredibly low scale. At the time, though, the site was small, didn't have a lot of money. We kind of understood it was a passion project. Here's the thing, though. That rate never went up. The company grew and grew over the last 10 years. It got millions of dollars in investments, became a billion-dollar company, put on conventions worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And at the end of the day, that money never trickled down to us. The rate stayed exactly the same. $1 per 100 words. Now, to be fair to them, they did introduce a bonus system. They would pay $250 if you wrote 60 articles in a month. So think about that. If you wrote 60 news pieces at that time, 200, 300 words, you would get paid on net about $7 per news article, $6 or $7, which is a lot better. But in order to do that, you actually had to write, so much, 2 articles per day, which isn't a full-time job, to be fair, but it is a substantial investment. And if you didn't meet these thresholds, yes, there were lower bonus amounts, but they were substantially lower. So really, if you wanted to make, that bonus, a $250 a month bonus, you had to go all out. You had to go 60 articles a month, and then you'd get paid, $6 or $7 an article, which I think is generally a little more reasonable. But still, why wouldn't you just double the base rate? If your base rate for a news article is $2 an article, $3 an article based off, 200 or 300 words, why wouldn't you just pay $7 an article instead of creating this bonus system where you only get paid if you really go all out for the full month? What if something happens? You're a freelancer. You have, you probably have another job. Well, not probably. Everyone has another job, you have probably people to take care of. What if you get sick? What if something comes up in life? What if you get a position freelancing for another company, right? At the end of the day, it's really only if you devote all your time to making this company a success that you're going to get this bonus, and even then, the rate is very low. So just think about that. And then there were just so many broken promises. I remember when I started writing, I was a year into writing, Menashe said that if you worked for 3 years at the company, there would kind of be this loyalty pay. So you'd get paid $25 an article instead of 10 for the feature articles. And lo and behold, after almost 3 years, I was like a month today, I was at E3, we're all hanging out. I'm like, Menashe, I'm a month away from this bonus that you promised. And he was like, and kind of chuckled and said, oh, I can't afford that. You thought like I was serious? Or like, oh, we can't afford that. That isn't happening anymore. I don't even remember how he justified it. But regardless, it never happened. He made this promise. Another promise. They said that they would give stock options to 5 or 6 of the most loyal writers, and of course I was one of them. I've written more than 2,000 articles, and he promised that, when we go public, you'll have shares, right? And they went public. Never got my shares I was promised, okay? Or anyone that was promised shares, nobody ever got them. I would follow up once again when I'd see him, because I would see him in person. I'd say, where are these stocks? And he'd say, they're off, rubbed off for you. Like, they're there for you. Don't worry, we'll get it figured out. And I would follow up, and they were never, I never got certification. We never got the stocks we were promised, which is incredibly frustrating because you were there from the beginning. You saw the company grow, and you thought that at least something would be promised to you. As the company grows, you'd have some sort of investment in it. If you weren't going to pay me in dollars, at least I would get some sort of, share of this company. And it never happened. It's incredibly frustrating. Other writers I knew were promised promotions, not me personally, other than this, the stocks and the raises. Other writers I know that I've talked to were promised promotions and raises, and they never went through. They never got what they were promised. Many people I know wanted to make this their full-time job. They were promised. I wanted to make it a full-time job. We never got what we were promised, even as the company grew. And there was this incredible sort of dichotomy, because the people in Toronto working, for example, you'd have people doing graphics, right, for the company itself. and they would be making, $30,000 a year, let's say, right? Whatever the base rate was for someone to do graphics at a new company, right? We would get so much less than that, right? So we saw this brand new person that would come in just, a day ago making 30 grand off the bat, which, to be fair, good for them, making a living wage. A company should pay, when it's that big, or any company should pay a living wage. Totally down. But why was that never trickling down to us? We were still making, $1 per 100 words, $2 per articles, and you've got people coming in and making literally, a living wage, which is great. But why wasn't that, why weren't we getting that? Why weren't we getting average freelance pay? Whatever it was, So it was incredibly frustrating. Something else I noticed, and people I've talked to have mentioned it, is that at least in the initial stages of the company's growth in Toronto, there was this sort of inner circle limited to Orthodox Jewish people, men specifically, who got promotions, who got hired, who got the best positions. And I say this as, a Jewish person myself. I had bar mitzvah, obviously. I was on the board here for the Jewish law students at Yale last year. So don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not being anti-Semitic here. But the fact of the matter is, if you looked at the demographics of who was getting promoted, who was getting hired, it was almost overwhelmingly, especially at the top levels at the beginning of the company's growth, was Orthodox Jewish men. And it's just shocking to think about. I knew people that were there for a long time too who were passed up on promotions because they weren't part of the club. So now, of course, with the investors coming in and the growth, it's a little more diverse. But especially in those initial years of investment, it was shocking. I visited and I'm like, I've never seen a company with this many Orthodox Jews. And there's no problem with having, obviously you want a diverse workforce. But when, the overall company's writers are very small percent Jews, but then the elites, the ones getting promoted, are 90% Orthodox Jews, you start thinking, it's like, man, what's going on? So this was all very frustrating. And then we'd see these conventions getting put on, right, in Toronto. They would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars putting on conventions, right? I think their biggest convention cost almost $1 million. And at the end of the day, we didn't see that money. We were paraded out, right? It's like, oh, this is our longest running site. Look how big it is. For its investors, like we would meet their investors and they would see like, oh, these are all the hardworking people keeping our sites running, right? So we had all the value, but we never saw that come down to us. They used us to bring in further investors to build and grow the company, but we never got the gains of that. And we would so many times have to pay our way to conventions, right? They wouldn't pay for us to come out to cover events, whatever, E3, the Toronto conventions, other people went to other conventions, PAX. We would write articles and then we would just make enough to be able to fund our trips, pretty much. If not, sometimes we would lose on our trips because we would not make enough to make, and we were living in the worst, grimiest conditions. We stayed, our first E3 was so funny, actually our second E3, one of my coworkers still gives me shit for this. We stayed at a hotel where literally someone died and was put, you can look this up in LA, they put a documentary about it. Someone murdered someone and stocked them in the water tank at the top of the building. Everyone was like showering and drinking the water from this water tank for 3 months. And then later they found out about it and obviously fished her out. She disappeared. It's a really creepy story. You should look it up. I forgot what the hotel is called. But regardless, this is the place where we stayed. It was like $30 a night. It was the cheapest place in LA to stay by a long run. We had to share a bed. I mean, it was fine, but like these are sort of conditions we're traveling in as games journalists. And even then we're barely breaking even on our travel. It was ridiculous. Okay. So why am I telling this? How can I tell you this? You're probably thinking, oh my God, Eli, are you going to get sued? Did you sign an NDA? And the fact of the matter is, actually, I didn't sign an NDA. So for a lot of the beginning of the company's growth, things were like off the books, right? It was a real shoestring operation, I would say, and obviously when the investors came in and pumped in millions of dollars, they had to get their shit together, right? So they brought in the tax people, they brought in the accountants, they brought in the HR people, they made us sign all sorts of forms, right? But I didn't sign them because at that point, this happened maybe 3 or 4 years ago, right? I'd really come off of writing. I had realized that games journalism isn't going to work out for me because the chance of me finding a living wage as a games journalist was just astronomically low. So instead, I decided to go to law school. I got in. I came here to YLS. And that was it. So I still stayed intact. I actually helped people write articles. I was a features editor. They didn't pay me for that. I just kind of like volunteered to help out on coming up with features ideas and sometimes giving feedback on writing and that sort of thing. But because of that, I never took a payment from Enthusiast Gaming for the last several years, and I never had to sign the HR forms, never had to sign the NDA. So I think I might be one of the few people that can become public and actually talk about this, because many of my fellow coworkers actually sign NDAs, so they can't talk on the record, but I can because I never signed this. So that's why you're getting this from me unfiltered, because I am a little salty, obviously, because this was my dream job, and it didn't work out. And obviously, I like law too. That's why I came here, right? I've got a job next year secured that I'm really gonna like. I'm really excited for it. But, it's always funny to think like, oh, what could have gone differently? So let's talk about the last few years. Enthusiast Gaming goes on this giant content acquisition spree, right? They buy up a ton of websites. Sometimes they spend tens of thousands of dollars, right? If not more. I don't know the exact numbers. Acquiring these sites. Destructoid, Gamnesia, Siliconera, the Sims Resource, Escapist, right? All these big websites. And it's kind of funny because every quarter they come back and say, our sites had astronomical growth. Compared to last year, the number of our page views went up X%, went up from, I don't know, just pulling numbers out of a hat, from 5 million page views a month to 10 million page views a month. Astronomical growth. But if you looked at the actual sites themselves, some of them had growth. We're all growing steadily. But there was not this sort of growth. What was actually happening is the company was doling out tons and tons of money to acquire these websites to make it look like the growth was more astronomical than it actually was. And this, of course, fueled investing. This is why I think the company actually went up to over $1 billion in market valuation, then fell, is because people didn't realize that when they were showing this astronomical growth on the content production end, it was not because their sites were growing. They were spending $10,000 and getting back double the views. It was because they were acquiring so many websites that were already had established brands, right? The Sims Resource, I think, gets what, like 1 million, 2 million, 3 million page views a month. I don't remember exactly. Look at that. They added it in and then said, oh, our page views grew by 100%. It's like, that's only because you had investors buy up this money and make it look better than it was. I think ultimately the reason the stock price has fallen so much, I don't know for sure, obviously, although I actually ended up buying EGLX stock because I had faith in the company for some reason. I think the reason it fell so much was because people realized that first, the astronomical growth was unsustainable because they couldn't just acquire websites forever, and number two, because they realized how much the conventions are cost. The conventions lost tons of money. The investors come in and spend $1 million on a convention, and it was very difficult when you're spending that sort of money to break even. So one of the things that really bothered many of us is that they'd come in and they'd pump a bunch of money into some sort of project. Like I heard stories, right, where they hired someone to make videos on social media and they paid him a crap ton of money to do it, right, every day. And, they paid him a lot to do this, okay? And then after a month, it didn't pan out. It didn't have astronomical growth. And at the end of the day, they're like, all right, we're not doing this anymore. So instead of investing in the brands that they already had to build them up and to grow them, they would throw money at new projects, hoping it would see astronomical growth like that. And it didn't work, obviously, because you have to invest over a long period of time to make something a success. And at the end of the day, they shut down these websites. This is why I'm so salty at the end of this, okay? They brought along these writers for years and years. Not just that, but they acquired additional websites and they shut them down. Here's a graveyard of Enthusiast websites. Ready? OnlySP, Gamnesia, Gaming Street, Xbox Enthusiast, PC Enthusiast, PlayStation Enthusiast, and ultimately Nintendo Enthusiast. Oh, and Gaming Enthusiast, right? 8 sites, at least, that I can count, that they either built up or acquired. Half of those they acquired, right? and then just shut down. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if you're doing something that you're passionate about, that you really love, and someone just comes in, acquires your company, you're excited. There's this huge company, right, you think like, okay, this is a $1 billion company. They're going to invest. They're going to raise our wages. They're going to be able to invest in our brand. Nope. They just fire you less than a year later. Imagine that. So I was just super frustrated because there are so many promises, especially to the Nintendo Enthusiast folks who have been here for a decade, me almost a decade, right? I started working at Nintendo Enthusiast earlier than virtually every single person who is at that company now. Other than Menashe, who is now the ex-president, doesn't actively work for the company. I believe that I've been there longer than any single other person working for this company right now. And look at how they've treated me. Look at how they've treated my fellow workers. It's a betrayal, okay? They promised us that we would be able to work our dream jobs. But, at the beginning, we didn't have a lot of money. You can't support making everyone full-time because the site isn't big enough. But don't worry. Once we grow, once we're the size, we were told that we would be the size of IGN within 5 years, okay? That is what we were told. And I kind of laughed it off. No way. This was at the second or 33. It was when the investors came to visit, when we were paraded out to talk to the investors. And guess what? They achieved that goal. I actually think they're obviously not as big as Ziff Davis, which is IGN's parent company, but they're definitely in value, I think, now worth about as much total as IGN. And look at us. Left behind. At the end of the day, everyone was fired. Not reaping the gains of what we were promised. Let this be a lesson, okay? Let this be a lesson to everyone that when it comes to for-profit companies, they don't care about you. They will promise you the moon. It's easy to make promises, I have a friend that I joke with. He's like, when you're president one day, you need to pass legislation to buy me a car. And it's so funny because I'm like, yeah, sure, of course. I mean, obviously I'm joking, but the reality is, like, I'm never going to be the president, right? So, or have that sort of power. So it's like, I can promise you everything. I can promise that, I'm going to give everyone $10,000 when I'm elected, president, right? But it's like, it's easy to make that promise when I don't have to actually deliver on it, When you deliver on it, that's when people expect, when you have the power, when you have the money, when you have the ability to deliver on the promises that you made, that's when things are expected of you. And when it comes to a for-profit company, they don't care about you. They care about their bottom line. They care about bringing in more investors. And, we were misled. Part of that was on us. Maybe we should have known better. I mean, I kind of did, right? I hoped that this would turn out to be a full-time thing. And when I realized that that was not likely, right, I continued through college, and then I went to law school. I didn't waste any time. But other people put their lives on the line, being loyal, thinking that there was a future within Enthusiast Gaming, and they were treated poorly. And I feel terrible for them. There are certain people whose livelihoods were made. Some people, for example, that live abroad, who live in countries with much lower costs of living, who freelance and made enough without this was their primary job. To us, obviously, $2 an article is nothing, but if you're living in one of these, in certain countries, it is a lot cheaper to live, and people made enough to live off it. They would make, I don't know, $300, $400 a month with the bonus, and that they could actually make do. And without any warning, they shut the site down, and these people were thrown into the wilderness without any backup, without any support. All the promises broken. Okay? So, where does that leave us now? Well, we were just informed that all of our reviews are going to be erased off the site, and the site's going to go down. Think about that. Our reviews are the primary parts of our portfolio. If we want to freelance somewhere else, if we want to get a job somewhere else, you send them a game review and say, this is what I can contribute to your website. They're scrubbing those from our site because apparently it will compete with their other properties. Well, great. Thanks for doing that. Ultimately, and there was so much tone deafness, right? The executives didn't care about us. We're like that sort of neglected stepchild, okay? Because they cared about shiny new things, esports, conventions, but not about their content producers who have been with them the longest. Nobody cared about the quality of the content. There were certain longtime writers across the sites who had kind of an ego and would post without going to the proof process. So frequently you saw work coming out that should have been reviewed, but because there was no accountability measures, nobody was taking the time to look at this and make the edits that were necessary, and correct them and require them to go through the proving process as they were supposed to. I posted a heartfelt goodbye letter on the website. We put together nice testimonials from all the writers, and after 2 days they removed it because apparently one of the sentences I said, the company has decided to go in a different direction, and apparently that was showing the hand. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to show a little more of the hand in this video, but because I was being too explicit about the company's aims and repositioning from content creation, they took down our post with all of our testimonials about how much we've loved writing about games for Nintendo Enthusiast. There's been no collaboration or limited collaboration between all these properties they own, which made it even more difficult. You think if you're bringing so many writers into the fold, so many websites, you have some amount of collaboration. Nope. You're all on your own. Nobody cares, and there's so much tone deafness. Menashe, actually, the day before the vast majority of the Upwork, so Upwork is a website, it was almost shut down. It's still running, apparently, I just looked, but the vast majority of the writers were laid off. The day before this happened, the editor-in-chief of Upcomer sent a tweet that was like, huge success, we've doubled in size within the matter of months, or something like that, right? And Menashe, the day before they laid everyone off, retweeted him and said, congratulations, big news, I'm hoping for your growth, right? Next day, bam, vast majority of those writers get laid off. Think about that. Think about that tone deafness. Think about what that does to a person, okay? We were not treated as we should have. Nobody should treat their workers like this, especially not when you have the resources to treat them better. Anyway, that's all I've got. I think I'm going to release another video too with any additional thoughts that come up that I've forgotten here. With any other feedback I get from other employees that have reached out and want their stories to be heard but can't because they signed an NDA. And any questions that you have, I can answer. As you can see, I'm just really heartbroken and disappointed by the way not just I've been treated. I'm going to be okay. I'm graduating from law school in a month. I have a job lined up. I'm going to be okay. I'm far more angry for my fellow coworkers who were left out to dry, who really invested in this company with their time, some of them with their money, and really hope that this would help give them the life that they hope to live. And now they won't. That's all I got.